It's been a week since the new Path of Exile 2 League, Dawn of the Hunt, released, and I've been having an absolute blast, quite literally, playing the Tactician Ascendancy for the Mercenary that was brand new for this league, as well as utilizing Artillery Ballistas and Siege Cascade to absolutely melt and blast through packs in endgame. And I really want to share with you guys what this build is all about because it might be my favorite mapping character since I've played last League on launch with my Shattering Concoction build for Pathfinder. The build focuses on utilizing two main abilities. One being Artillery Ballista, which are totems that we spawn, and they have a mind of their own where they just pepper the battlefield with artillery shells and explode, dealing tons of fire damage, converted 100% to physical to fire damage to enemies in the area that they land in. But we also use another ability called Siege Cascade, which does basically the same thing, but we cast it ourselves from our crossbow as a bolt in the air, that then rains down on a certain amount of enemies that automatically tracks them. Both abilities automatically track enemies, so you don't need to aim at all with this skill, which is really useful for just absolutely blasting through packs of mobs without having to think at all. We also utilize Herald of Ash, which is a buff that lets our overkill damage create ignite explosions that help clear large amounts of enemies with the other two explosive skills that we already have. These are the main skills that we use for damage in this build, but for single target, we also like to use two grenade skills, one being Oil Grenade, which leaves behind this oil field that then also applies fire exposure to enemies caught in it, up to like minus 24% or something like that. We can also use Gas Grenade, which then can be ignited by our fire damage to help deal some big damage explosions. Currently, I have completed three Ascendancies. I'm working on my fourth one very soon as I'm level 81 and we're clearing through tier 8 to 9 maps. I'm hoping to get to tier 15 in no time. But currently, what we're looking at is this Ascendancy right here is extremely useful. It's projectile damage builds pin. That means any projectile damage of any source from us builds pin, including our totems, our artillery ballista totems. What pin does is it makes targets immobilize. Immobilize is a debuff that counts for pinned, heavy stunned, or frozen enemies, and a lot of skills actually benefit from immobilization or pinned enemies. Also, we take the next note here. Pinned enemies cannot perform actions, which basically makes them frozen. Pin normally just makes them unable to move, kind of like a root. But with this, they're effectively frozen because they can't move and they also can't attack. And it also cancels bosses out of their attacks, which is really useful for survivability without having to actually build into a lot of defenses. Thirdly, I took a solid plan for now, which basically just gives us 50%. It basically just gives back 50% of our spirit from our buffs so that we can store into more buffs. So before I was only running Defiance Banner and Herald of Ash, or Herald of Ash and Wind Dancer. But now I can run Herald of Ash, Wind Dancer, Defiance Banner, and Attrition, four buffs simultaneously with Vitality, Refraction, Cannibalism, Precision, and Clarity for a massive amount of buffs, giving me mana regen, life regen, damage, and more. The fourth ascendancy that I'm looking to get is either going to be Watch How I Do It, because makes it so that allies in your presence, which includes totems, by the way, for allies, gain added attack damage equal to 25% of your main hand weapon's damage. This is extremely big damage. If we were to have a weapon swap, kind of like a two-handed mace, for instance, and I'm looking forward to testing that out when I do end up getting it. Alternatively, you could just use a crossbow, because crossbows also have pretty good damage, being a two-handed weapon, and should be just good free damage no matter what for your totems. However, I was messing around with this ascendancy for a while called Cannons Ready, which makes it so that our totems have 30% more skill speed, but totems can only use their skills when you fire an attack projectile. So effectively, this helps our artillery ballistas surpass their normal attack limits by giving them more skill speed, so long as we can fire faster than they are firing. So every time we shoot, our artillery totem shoots. If you're firing a lot of projectiles, then they'll just keep on shooting off their cooldown, which for me right now, without that ability, is 0.63 second attacks per second with an attack time of 1.59 seconds. Now let me respec here so you guys can see what it's like. So now, my totems won't attack unless I attack. But when I do, you can see they are firing off. And it's very quick, actually, how fast they fire. If we're using something like armor-piercing rounds, which fires a lot of shots per second and also has a really fast reload time, they just constantly barrage the battlefield with fire. Whereas if I were to play without this Ascendancy node, they would be firing a lot slower, but they're still very effective because you don't have to shoot anything in order to get them to proc. It can be better in some cases to let your totems fire on their own, because maybe you don't want to have to think about firing yourself, or maybe you don't want to have to stand still and fire yourself. But it also seems like your totems fire wherever you shoot as well. So you can better aim your totem's fire rather than having it be automatic and sometimes even a little too random. This is great for bossing and also for killing rares that are inside large packs of mobs that your artillery totems sometimes don't kill because they're too busy firing off against the white mobs. But you can see that if I use this ability, Siege Cascade, which is our biggest damage dealer next to our artillery totems, you can see that it actually doesn't make them attack. I don't believe that this is a bug. I think this is intended, but it also kind of sucks because it makes it so that I can no longer use Siege Cascade in order to proc my totem's attacks. I'm assuming the reason they did this is because it would be a bit too powerful to have Siege Cascade proc the totems, because both abilities do like way too much damage together. But since you're firing a payload, basically, you're firing one bolt that is a payload into the air. The payload, for some reason, doesn't count as an attack projectile, but the projectiles that rain down from the payload in the air do count as attack projectiles, which actually can pin themselves, or can pin enemies on their own. So if you are going to use cannons ready, you're going to have to find something other than Siege Cascade to use in order to make your totems fire. But a cool thing is that grenades actually do fire off and proc the totems to cast. Unfortunately, it's a lot more random than if you're just shooting with an ability like AP rounds or rapid shot. Hell, you could even just use your basic crossbow bolt to direct your totems if you want. So use cannons ready if you want to surpass your artillery ballista's normal limitations on their skill speed, and have them fire even faster than usual. I found personally that I actually prefer having cannons ready not socketed in and just having them be automatic so I can use Siege Cascade because it's really big damage. But in some cases, maybe it's better single target damage to have cannons ready because it kills bosses a lot faster. So it's kind of a trade-off. Do whatever you feel is more comfortable. All right, now let's go into the supports for our skills. So for Artillery Ballista, I'm using Inspiration because the skill cost is way too high for this ability. It was like 180 mana. So having 30% less cost is letting us place a lot more of them a lot more often without using our entire mana pool to place them. So you can see I'm only using like half of it to place 3. Before I was using half of my mana to place one of them. So I would have to place 2, use a mana pot, then place the third one, which was really frustrating. I've also gone into the skill tree and taken some nodes that reduce mana cost of attacks, as well as having skill mana costs converted to life costs, and that's helped a lot. But we're also using Immolate, so that supported attacks can gain 30% of damage as extra fire damage against ignited enemies, and since both Siege Cascade and Artillery Ballista help ignite with their fire damage conversions. It's very easy to get the free damage from this. You could also use Immolate on Siege Cascade instead, or vice versa, whatever you feel is better. We use Concentrated Effect, same thing, you can use it on Artillery Ballista or Siege Cascade, which gives 30% more area damage but less area of effect, which is totally fine. And then we also use Leverage. For support skills, have 50% increased critical hit chance against immobilized enemies. And as I said before, immobilized counts for pinned enemies. Now, something that's really cool about both of these abilities with Artillery Ballista and Siege Cascade is that the initial hit has a hit proc as well as the explosion afterwards. So what can happen sometimes is the initial projectile hitting the ground, like with Siege Cascade here, you see there's a little delay before the explosion. That initial projectile can inflict pin, so that way the explosion afterwards can hit the pin monster and then benefit from the increased critical hit chance against immobilized enemies. But personally, I like the idea more of having my Artillery Ballista fire automatically at enemies to pin them, and then Siege Cascade rains down and absolutely deletes them. Right now I have leverage on Artillery Ballista because I felt that Artillery Ballista was doing more damage than Siege Cascade. However, now I think it's actually the opposite, and my Siege Cascade is melting mobs way faster. The only problem with Siege Cascade, though, is that it's really bad for single target damage in most cases, because it only fires one projectile per enemy in range, and if you're fighting a boss, then it's only going to fire one bolt, or one attack projectile from the sky. It'll still deal a lot of damage, especially to pinned enemies, because it gains 200% more damage against a mobile enemy on top of the quality. We're getting 40% since it's only at 10% quality, but up to 80% more damage as well against immobilized enemies. So if you do manage to pin with your artillery ballistas and then fire this bolt off, it'll do a lot of damage. For Siege Cascade, we're using Mana Bounty because I'm having mana issues, so enemies killed by hits from support skills get more flash charges. We're using Primal Armament for 25% more weapon elemental damage, and Execute, which has support skills deal 50% more damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. I'm taking Execute because usually our Siege Cascade is hitting enemies that are already below half health from our Artillery Ballista, and it helps them just finish them off faster. For AP rounds, I'm just using Splinter and Demolisher to help break more armor. It basically instantly breaks armor, which is awesome. You don't have to use AP rounds, but I'm using it just for armor break. For Oil Grenade, we're taking Strip Away so that exposure has 20% increased effect, and also blinds enemies on hit for survivability sake. For a Gas Grenade, as I said earlier, we're using Corrosion to help break armor equal to the poison damage, as well as Scatter Shot because it doesn't give us a cost multiplier, and we just get more grenades cast from it. It's worth noting that Gas Grenade got kind of nerfed in that you can only have up to 6 gas clouds at once. So if you fire more than 6, then they disappear. And then on our normal crossbow shot, we have Soul Thief for mana leech whenever we run out of flash charges. I can just shoot an enemy a few times to get mana back. And Culling Strike to help finish off enemies. But we are also now using Attrition, which gives us Culling Strike against bosses and rares that have been in our presence for at least 33 seconds. So great in long boss battles, since we are lacking some single target damage right now. You also deal more hit damage to them. That's about it for the skills. Let's look at our passive tree. For the passive tree, we're going to get every single totem node that we can get, especially these ones up here. Totem range and speed, placement speed, damage while you have a totem, as well as attack speed per summon totem. We can have up to 3 totems. You can get +1 more if you use another support that gives you +1 to totems, but it also makes their duration less, so you'll have to place them more often, which can be really detrimental to your mana. We're grabbing fire damage wherever we can. We're grabbing area effect for attacks wherever we can, as well as area damage wherever we can. Uh, Definitely want these attack speed nodes because our totems will just fire faster. Um, Totem damage, strength, get some nice jewels in your build. Come down here, grab +1 to totems. Come down here, grab another +1 to totems, so you can have 3. at base, and then also get these fire nodes give you a lot of damage down here. These area damage nodes give you a lot of damage. I'm going into Polymathy just because I was having some attribute problems. And then we're grabbing these for our defenses because we're doing hybrid strength and dex. We're kind of locked into armor evasion gear. You could do all armor or all evasion, but I kind of wanted to mess around with armor and evasion hybrid gear. And it's actually been working pretty well because whenever we do get hit through our 60% evasion, we reduce some of the physical damage by about 20% with Wind Dancer up, which is really nice actually. We're not just getting one shot, especially since we have a pretty decent health pool to mitigate some of that damage. You do want to make sure that your res capped. It'll help a lot. If you find yourself dying a lot, check your reses. If they're not 75%, you'll notice a big difference whenever you do get them to 75%. You'll be dying a lot less. I was dying like almost every map until I capped them, and now I'm like, I've only died like once or twice the past couple days. All right, lastly for gear, you want to have a very good crossbow with +5 or +6 to all projectile skills, or +4 even if you can't get a 5 or a 6. That's because it's kind of hard to scale the damage of the ballistas without just a bunch of levels to the gym. So we have +5 on our crossbow and +2 on our amulet. You want to get resistances wherever you can. There's not a whole lot else going on here except for get as much life and evasion rating as you can on your gear, as well as solve your resistances. I got lucky and I got some nice rarity find on a lot of these pieces. Um, you want to have at least 20% movement speed on your boots, if not 30%. 30% is ideal, but mine's only 25 and it has nice resistances, so get whatever you can. One other thing I want to talk about is that when I do end up getting this node up here, I was considering using a two-handed mace in order to give a fuck ton of damage, or added attack damage to our totems. Um, you may be wondering, well, how are you going to proc cannons ready then, if you're using a two-handed mace? Well, what we could do is we could use a weapon swap. So I use crossbow to place the totems, and then I can weapon swap to a mace. And you notice that the totems don't disappear, so they're still around even when you weapon swap. This gave me the idea that I could use this ability called Molten Blast, as Molten Blast actually fires attack projectiles, which are all that you need in order to proc cannons ready. So what we could do is get a nice two-handed mace, use Molten Blast, and use that to fire off projectiles in order to cast cannons ready and have our totems do a ton of damage with our two-handed mace damage bonus added to them. This is something I really want to test in the future, probably when I get my 4th Ascendancy. Right now, I'm kind of owning through maps with just this setup though, so I don't want to change too much yet. But I definitely will try it out for you guys and let you guys know how that is. Sounds like a pretty cool concept, being able to use ballistas while also doing pseudo melee with maces and stuff. And also, when you are leveling, you don't get access to ballista totems until I think 31, 32. So until then, it might be kind of a struggle. I was using explosive shot and explosive grenades because they combo well together. You could use something else entirely though, like fragment rounds or hell, even like rapid shot or something. But just be warned that the leveling process is a little scuffed right now with this build. It's a bit scuffed. I highly recommend when you're leveling to go into as much damage node as you can, probably along this side of the tree. Projectile damage. Get some two-handed damage for your crossbows. And then whenever you do get your totems unlocked, you can respec and go down here instead. Alright, that'll be it for me. Good luck out there. Path of Exile 2 has been picking up in speed for me, and it's been a lot more fun than it was at the start of the league. I hope you guys are having fun as well. And I'll see you guys next time. Later.